The talks lasted into the night and ended with a ceasefire proposal far broader than anyone expected, demanded by the Americans and accepted by the Ukrainians. But agreeing a truce plan with only one side won't stop a war.
Today we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court.
The Americans said they came to see whether Ukraine was committed to President Trump's plan for peace. His top diplomat was trying to change the tone of the last 2 weeks.
Mr. Rubio, your expectations for the meeting today?
It'll be good, he says, giving me a thumbs up. The Ukrainians gathered, badly needing an end to Mr. Trump's freeze on military support, a move the US said was meant to compel them to the table. And so they came with only the warmest of words.
And we're very open, and we want to have very constructive, deep, friend, partners conversation with our American partners.
And then a glimpse of the highest level meeting since ties between these once inseparable friends descended into acrimony. And the moment to see if a broken alliance could be fixed. Tonight, Mr. Zelensky said he welcomed the US truce plan.
The American side understands our arguments, perceives our proposals, and I want to thank President Trump for the constructive conversation between our teams.
No, in this entire meeting, have you said thank you?
That's a thank you the Trump team had angrily demanded in the Oval Office, even though the Ukrainian leader has expressed thanks to the US dozens of times. But the reprieve for this relationship is critical to his country. He was in Saudi Arabia, but not at the talks, in which the US has announced it will immediately reinstate its weapons supply and intelligence sharing with Ukraine.
Ukraine, ceasefire. Ukraine, ceasefire. Just agreed to a little while ago. Now we have to go to Russia and hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road.
The talks at this table lasted more than 8 hours. This is where they arrived at the proposal for an immediate ceasefire. But many in Europe have been deeply concerned about that, about the idea of moving to a quick truce without first negotiating the mechanism to enforce it. The talks here have grabbed the focus, even as the 3-year war they seek to end intensifies. Mr. Trump's officials will take his plan next to Moscow. A president who wants an immediate ceasefire, but on whose terms? Tom Bateman, BBC News, Jeddah.
Well, President Trump says that he's likely to speak to President Putin this week. And Russia's foreign ministry said tonight that they didn't rule out contact with US representatives. But just hours before the talks in Jeddah took place, Russia was dealing with Ukraine's largest drone attack, including on Moscow, since the beginning of the war. 3 people were killed and 20 injured, including a child. Here's Steve Rosenberg.
Just hours before Ukraine backed a ceasefire, it launched a massive drone attack on Russia, the largest the Moscow region had ever seen. And it left a trail of destruction. There were dead and wounded, and homes shredded. Russia has been pounding Ukraine constantly. But last night, here, it was on the defense. In the south of Moscow, we saw this block of flats that had been struck by a drone. All day long, people stopped and stared, as if they couldn't believe that war had come to their neighborhood. How can this happen in Moscow? Tatiana says. It's outrageous. Don't we have air defenses? Don't they work? But how to respond? Mikhail says, hit the scum harder, meaning Ukraine. No, says Tatiana, this needs to be decided at a political level. Politicians must end this. Not politicians, Mikhail says, but Russia's army. Few Russians foresaw scenes like this 3 years ago. The Kremlin launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the pretext of making Russians safer, more secure. But this kind of thing never used to happen. There were no drone attacks on Russian towns and cities before the war in Ukraine. Before the conflict, Muscovites couldn't imagine their city being a front line. But will Moscow agree to a ceasefire? It's hard to imagine based on the messaging.
The best possible outcome is, of course, total capitulation of Ukraine and Europe. We have to finish this war one way or another, and I hope that what was left of Ukraine would be totally demilitarized and neutralized, and live in peace and not used as a spearhead against Russia.
With these drone attacks, Ukraine's message to Russia is clear. It has no intention of capitulating. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.